Alright, what is up everybody? Welcome to the December tier list, the final tier list for 2020. We didn't do one in November because there were really so few changes, it didn't really seem worth it. Now that McNeil has been released, it seems valuable to get a new tier list out there, including McNeil. So yeah, let's just jump straight into it. Let's talk about what the tiers mean. We're going to continue using S to D. S is like God's tier units, probably overpowered. These are the things you're going to see like constantly in the meta game. They're going to be everywhere. They're just really, really good units. A tier is very strong. This is going to be the stuff that makes up the vast majority of high tier decks. Of course, again, this is based on competitive play. So that's why you're not going to see, you know, all of the tech units in S tier. Because in high tier play, the tech units are not as good as they are lower down. Anyway, A tier is going to be very strong units. This makes up most of players' decks. B tier tends to be the remaining units, things you can't do without, such as lasers and missiles, but aren't actually that insane, like they're not that strong, but you put them in your deck because they fill a gap that nothing else does. They're solid units, nothing wrong with B tier. C tier is playable, but probably not recommended, so this is things where if someone makes them, I'm not like completely surprised, but I'm a little surprised. Like, I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem like a great choice. But, you know, it's respectable. You can play a C tier unit. It's okay. And then D tier is the point at which these units are just not really worth playing. Like, there's almost always a better option. The classic example of there always being a better option is probably Shocks and Flames. Where Shocks, I think, maybe there's a reason to play them, especially with Snipers being as bad as they are right now. But Flame Troopers, there's just no reason to ever play them over Fanatics. So that's why they end up in D tier. Anyway, let's move on to the commanders, as always. We start with the commanders. Here is the previous commander list, and here is the new commander list. As you can see, there's no changes. The only change is McNeil now exists. I've put McNeil in B tier. I think McNeil is decent. I don't think he's as good as Strong Arm. I think he's better than Liang. I think he's probably on par with Solomon and Jackson. Perfectly acceptable commander, just nothing too exciting. Really doesn't do anything that fancy. Not sure it's even really worth playing at the moment. It's still too early to say. I need to play against McNeil a lot more, I think, to get a good handle on whether or not McNeil is good. But yeah, I think B tier makes sense for him. Oksana, Seth, and Strongarm still leading the way as the most played commanders in top tier. Seth potentially should even be S tier. Seth is seeing a lot more play than Oksana now. Most people have switched from Oksana to Seth. Most GDI decks are playing either Strongarm or Solomon currently. I don't see Jackson around that much. But I do think Jackson's raw power level is still on par with Solomon. And I think Strongarm is still the best. And Jade and Liang continue to be almost worthless. Occasionally you'll see people using Liang well, like Peter. That's 54144, whatever he's called in game, something weird like that. And he makes Liang look really good, but he's like the one guy that does it. Everyone else makes Liang look kind of bad. Jade continues to do basically nothing, and Kane continues to be fine, kind of playable. I'm considering Kane maybe B tier, but the high cost and the low impact against certain popular decks means that he remains in C tier. He can be very high impact. He can be very good. He can be A tier in the right matchups, but most of the time he's not great, which means he ends up still in C. All right. Let's talk about Nod. Here is the previous Nod rankings, and here are the new Nod rankings. So yeah, not a lot of changes. Fanatics have finally moved down to A tier. With the Catship reigning supreme, people are playing a lot less Fanatics. You can't really play Fanatics and Catship in the same deck. They fill the same role as your like medium expensive anti-infantry unit. So you don't really want to play them together, which means that people have started playing Catship over Fanatics because it's just broken. So, like, Catship is truly an S tier unit, so yeah. The other thing that's come out of this is that if you're not playing Catship, you're almost always playing Shade, or you're playing them both together. Shade or Catship, or both, really is almost every Nod deck in existence right now. So yeah, Shade is back in S tier. This thing it's been broken since it came out. The only reason it got moved down, really, was, it was so much worse than it was after, like, before the nerf, that it kind of seemed like it might be okay. But the more you play against and with it, the more you realize it's still not okay. Like, it's not insanely broken like it was, but it's still broken. The unit is way too good. It's just better than Orca. It's cheaper and better than Orca. The only thing it does worse than Orca is kill Pitbulls, and that's it. Everything else it's better than Orca are doing. So it's just, yeah, it's a ridiculous unit. definitely needs a nerf. It's put it in S tier now, and I think that's where it probably should have always been. It was just a backlash from it getting such a big nerf that made me think maybe it wasn't super duper broken. Now I'm reasonably convinced it's just still super broken. So yeah, Fanatics moved down thanks to Catship. Shades moved up because it's just dumb. Buggies moved back to B tier. This is because people have begun to adapt to the buggy. There's a lot more Orca around. People know how to fight against the buggy as well. They're expecting the buggy tank combo more often now, which means that when you go buggy, they don't try and counter with pitbulls or bikes and get eaten by the tanks. They tend to respond with things like air units, which they know the tank deck doesn't do well against. So yeah, buggy really only exists in this small metagame of the buggy tank combo, which has been a very powerful deck for a while, but people are starting to adjust now. And the buggy itself is not that strong. It was just the combo of luring people into making units that get countered by your tank that really made it strong. And now people are falling for that less. So yeah, buggy's down to B. And finally, laser drones up to C. This is mostly because Natsky demanded they go to C. I still think laser drones are terrible, but they do still fight okay. They don't kill harvesters, but they still fight vehicles okay. And they're still super annoying and super cheap. Like, for their cost, they do a lot of damage. But they're pretty bad. Like, I wouldn't recommend anyone play laser drones. I don't like laser drones. But yeah, they're not completely unplayable. I don't think they deserve that D tier ranking. But, I don't know, they're like borderline C and D. Everything else has pretty much stayed the same. Not a lot to say that we haven't already talked about. Everything else is, you know, as I already said earlier, the Flamers are in deep just because there's no reason to play Flamers. It's not because Flamers suck. Like, if you play Flamers, they're okay. Like, the unit is fine, minus. Maybe should be a C tier unit, but there's just no reason to ever touch it because you can play Fanatics, Militants, Wheels, Buggy, Catship, Venom. There's so many better options. Chuggy, like, so many better options out there. There's just no reason to ever really play Flamers. So yeah, anyway, not rant over about Flamers. Let's move on to GDI. Here is the previous GDI, and here is the new GDI. Basically, nothing has changed with GDI since October. Obviously, we just had McNeil be released, and that's it. We've had no balance patch in... I can't even remember when the last balance patch we had. It feels like it's been forever. So yeah, the metagame adjusted slightly, and that was reflected in the October tier list, with the Talons and the Jump Jets moving up to A tier. Because that's a very popular deck now with the Talon Jump Jet. The Bike Rush APC deck has become popular with the Dogs Jump Jet, APC, Rifles, Talon, Pitbulls. Basically just all A and S tier units. Doesn't even play Missile Troops. It gets the Missile Troops from the APC. And that deck's very strong. I've been playing it a lot. Actually, I really like it. It is very strong. The ability to... Dogs and Rifles gives you a incredibly strong early game. And then Jump Jets and Talon gives you the ability to just spam cheap units at pads when you need to. Jump Jets are really powerful. You've got decent anti-air because Pitbulls basically cover all anti-air duties. And anytime you need a little bit of support, the Talon's there to provide it. So yeah, that deck's really strong, I think. I don't know if it's better than traditional APC. I'm enjoying playing it more. But I don't know if it's actually more powerful. It might be. It honestly might be. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, I digress. No changes have really happened because that was the last major meta shift, was this deck emerging, and nothing has changed since then. That's still the deck that a lot of people are playing. That people are like, there's a couple of guys playing like Razorback decks, but not really. Yeah. So anyway, let's talk about the actual changes. Slingshot's moved up to B. I still think Slingshot's kind of a bad unit, but it's such a toxic design of this like unit that sits and denies like 7 tiles of air units. Like, it denies so much space because it's got 2 range, so it denies like huge swathes of the battlefield. There's just no way this unit can ever be balanced. I think it's always, if it's good at its job, it's gonna be overpowered and toxic, and if it's bad at its job, then it's unplayable because it only has one job. So it's just a horrible design in my opinion. And yeah, the Rivals is played on such a small battlefield that on a lot of maps, Slingshot basically denies the entire relevant battlefield of air units. Like, a lot of maps you fight over a small central area, and the Slingshot can cover all of it. So it just denies air completely for the entire game, which is outrageous. It's incredibly toxic design. And then other maps where you have to move it around a lot, it's complete trash because it doesn't cover enough of it. It doesn't cover the whole map anymore, and that's the only time it's good is when it covers the whole map. So yeah, anyway, I hate Slingshot. I think it's a horrible unit. I think it should be deleted from the game. It's just terrible design. But yeah, it's still okay at its job, and anytime it's okay at its job, it's gonna be too good. So I've put it back in B tier because it still does okay. Like, there are decks that just can never beat Slingshot. Sometimes you make a Slingshot on the right map, and the game is just over immediately because your opponent's deck, it just can't really fight without their air units. Anyway, I hate Slingshots. Let's move on. Mammoth is down in D now. He's insanely slow. Like, I've tried playing Mammoth again. It's slower than a Harvester. I don't think that was ever supposed to be this slow. This is outrageous. Like, I know it got nerfed in speed, and that was fine, because maybe, like, the speed was what was making it too good, because it got a buff ages ago for speed. But I don't remember it ever being this slow back when it used to be slower. So I think they might have over-nerfed the speed and made it way too slow, because it's actually slower than a Harvester, which is insane. Plus, with McNeil existing, if you ever play Mammoth against McNeil, it can't move at all. Like, it literally gets, like, frozen in place by McNeil because it's so slow. And also, you have to play Jackson if you're going to play Mammoth because it's so slow. You have to be able to boost it. And it's insanely expensive, and yeah, it's just so bad now. I mean, obviously, if you get a Mammoth out and you get it on the pads, it probably still wins the game, but you can do that with, like, cheaper units. You can do it with, like, Titan. You get a Titan out, you get it to the pad, you probably win the game. So why are you spending an extra, like, 100 Tiberium on a Mammoth? Anyway, Mammoth kind of terrible. Put it in D now. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. Like I said, there hasn't really been a lot of changes because the metagame hasn't evolved that much. The main change has been people adapting to the buggy deck and people playing this Bike Rush deck. But the Bike Rush deck was represented in the previous tier list when I moved Jump Jets and Talon up. Alright, hope you guys enjoyed that tier list. And yeah, last one for the year. And I'll see you guys in 2021.